In the year 1869, the first Japanese immigrants arrived in the United States. The Japanese were recruited to work on the Hawaiian sugar plantations because of their high level of agricultural skills. They brought new things to the United States, such as mulberry trees, tea plants, and bamboo roots. By the year 1880, there were 148 Japanese living in the U.S. The history of Little Tokyo began in 1885 when a man by the name of Hamanosuke Shigeta opened a restaurant on Jackson Street in Los Angeles. Shortly after, during the 1900s, there were several first-generation Japanese Americans, otherwise known as Issei, that had established their businesses in the area. Around 1905, the area began being called Little Tokyo, even though other ethnic and religious groups resided there. However, as other Issei came to Los Angeles looking for jobs and housing, the Japanese population of Little Tokyo began to grow. Immigration continued until 1907, until the Gentlemen's Agreement was created. This agreement, however, did not stop immigration altogether. The Immigration Act, or Exclusion Act, of 1924 allowed 100 Japanese immigrants into the U.S. every year. There were, however, other laws that existed to prohibit the Issei from gaining citizenship or owning property, which caused employment and housing discrimination. Between 1914 and 1924, Japanese Americans came to Little Tokyo as a way to survive and escape from such a segregated society. They built shops along First Street and had vegetable markets along Central Avenue. In the late 1970s, Japanese corporations began to expand overseas and set up their U.S. headquarters in the Los Angeles area. Many new hotels, shops, and major Japanese banks were built. Little Tokyo was a great place for Japanese Americans to be, since it was near all of the great things Los Angeles had to offer. Japanese immigration first began because of different reasons. Japan at the time was having difficulties because of a large rate of unemployment and bankruptcy. There was also a fear of safety. The bad economy resulted in a large number of dangerous riots. The pan-ethnic formation model makes the most sense for Japanese immigration to the United States. There were obvious push-pull factors, but there was also back-and-forth migration going on. While the Japanese may have come to escape difficulties, there were still some that returned back to Japan after making enough money. They also did not necessarily assimilate to the dominant culture of the United States, but rather continued to stay in their ethnic groups.
Life for everyone changed drastically on December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Imperial Japanese Navy that morning, and 2,402 people were killed and 1,282 were wounded. Americans were shocked to see that some other country had actually attacked the United States, dragging them into yet another world war. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066, which required most people with Japanese ancestry to be excluded from the entire Pacific coast. All these people were forced to move to relocation camps where they could be watched in case they were spies for Japan. 110,000 to 120,000 Japanese Americans were removed from their homes and businesses and were forced to relocate to internment camps. Little Tokyo became a ghost town almost overnight, as most of the town's population was shipped away to relocation centers. While many Japanese Americans owned shops and businesses in the Little Tokyo area, the rest of the people who owned shops there were suffering by the lack of businesses. There was talk about turning it into a Latin American section in order to do something with the now vacant buildings. With World War II now in full motion, Los Angeles faced a major labor shortage, and a migration of African Americans started to flood to California to seek employment. At this time, many of the neighborhoods had restrictive housing covenants that barred African Americans from living in white neighborhoods. They ended up living in Little Tokyo's vacant buildings. By 1943, this once pristine city turned into the slums. In October of 1943, they officially changed the name of Little Tokyo to Bronzeville. While Bronzeville was known for its poor living conditions and housing, it boasted an array of nighttime activities like clubs that were frequently visited by the wartime workers. In 1945, most of the former residents of Little Tokyo returned back to their old city. African Americans moved out of the area because their leases were up or they were bought out by the returning Japanese Americans. In some rare cases, they were even sued. After the war, business returned back to normal. While most African Americans left the area, there were still many that decided to make Little Tokyo their permanent home and contributed to the growing shops and businesses. Little Tokyo was the birthplace of the fortune cookie and the California roll, which was invented by a chef named Ichiro Mashita at the Tokyo Kaikan Sushi restaurant. Authentic souvenirs are everywhere in these tiny gift shops, filled with items from Japanese pop culture, cuisine, and entertainment. There's even a Sanrio outlet in the middle of the park. The architecture in the village plaza makes visitors feel like they've stepped out of the States and into Japan. A block away from the plaza is a monument to astronaut Ellison S. Onizuka, a Japanese American from Hawaii who was a mission specialist on the Space Shuttle Challenger when it exploded during takeoff in 1986. Little Tokyo is a community that has experienced change, just like any community in this country. Little Tokyo is still highly populated by Japanese Americans, but the community itself has attracted all types of people. Once upon a time, there were small markets and stores that existed in order to be of service to the Japanese-speaking workers. But now Little Tokyo has begun to shift its focus a little bit more towards people living around and in the communities by offering restaurants that are pricey as well as apartments that tend to be considered high-end. The Japanese culture is still obviously a big part of the community, which can be seen in the traditions and celebrations that occur on a regular basis. The majority of the business owners in Little Tokyo are indeed Japanese, but most of the businesses that have been open in the past 5 to 10 years are not Japanese owned. Korean, Chinese, Latino, white, African American, and Iranian people have all been able to come into Little Tokyo and open businesses, and many of those businesses are targeting the Japanese culture. This goes to show that even though Little Tokyo is a community that has historically catered to Japanese-speaking individuals, people of other ethnicities have been able to play a role in the community. This has created an interesting situation. The Japanese culture is considered a minority group here in the United States, but many people of the different ethnicities who have opened up businesses in Little Tokyo have, in a way, adopted the Japanese culture, which is the dominant group of Little Tokyo, and created a form of acculturation within the community.